Dani's life had been nothing short of a relentless struggle to regain something she had lost. For years, she had clung to the hope that one day she would find her way back to both men she had once loved. But the passage of time had only served to deepen the chasm between them. Andre, her current partner, could see it. He had known for a long time that Dani's heart was not fully his. It was still tethered to Bill, who, despite his failing health, loomed large in Dani's mind and heart. When Bill's condition deteriorated and Dani's concern for him grew more obvious, it became clear to Andre that their relationship was doomed. He confronted Dani, and the conversation that followed was suffocating. He told her that he could not continue living in the shadow of Bill's illness and her unresolved emotions. And just like that, he left. The loss of Andre should have been painful, but it felt more like a formality. Dani had been anticipating it for a long time. Still, the reality of being alone hit her harder than expected. The house felt emptier, her days longer. But as much as she tried to convince herself to move on, the unspoken bond with Bill was unshakable. She would visit him at his home, taking care of him while he lay bedridden. The doctor had said there was little hope. His body was slowly succumbing to a terminal illness, and soon he would be gone. But for Dani, the moments she spent beside him were bittersweet. They were a reminder of everything she had once held dear. It was during one of these visits that Dani overheard a conversation that would change everything. Bill's attorney, a sharp-eyed man who had been working with Bill for years, was sitting with him at the edge of the bed. Dani had only meant to check in, but the words that slipped through the door cracked open a door to a world she never thought she would be part of again. The attorney was reading through Bill's will. But it wasn't just the document that caught Dani's attention, it was Bill's decision. Dani had assumed that, after everything they had been through, she would at least inherit something. Maybe not the house or all his wealth, but surely something. But what she heard shattered her. Bill's voice, hoarse from illness but unmistakable, stated clearly that Dani was to receive nothing. No money, no property, nothing. In contrast, Haley, Bill's current wife, was to inherit everything after his death. It was a blow Dani wasn't prepared for. To think that she, the woman who had stood by Bill through their marriage, had given him everything, was now to be left with nothing. Haley, the woman who had come into his life after their divorce, was the one who would benefit from his legacy. Dani, in that moment, was nothing more than a ghost in Bill's life, forgotten and discarded. But what Dani didn't know was that Haley wasn't the angel she appeared to be. Haley, too, had her own motives, her own dark ambitions. And while Dani initially contemplated leaving it all behind, accepting her fate, something in her snapped. The injustice was too much. Bill's betrayal was a wound she could not ignore. Dani knew deep down that she was not done yet. If she couldn't win Bill's love, she would take his legacy. She would claim what she believed was rightfully hers. It wasn't long before Dani found an unexpected ally in Naomi, Bill's estranged daughter from a previous marriage. Naomi had always been an outsider in her father's life, and the years had not been kind to their relationship. Naomi, too, had been left out of Bill's will. She, too, had been robbed of any claim to her father's wealth. The two women, despite their differences, saw an opportunity in their shared grievance. They quickly formed an alliance, each with her own reason for wanting Haley out of the picture. Naomi was cold and calculating, with no love lost for her father. For her, the money and property meant everything. She was tired of living in the shadow of her father's wealth, always overlooked, always second-rate. Dani, on the other hand, was driven by her need for revenge. Bill had wronged her, and she could not let Haley, of all people, take everything from her. Together, they devised a plan that was as ruthless as it was calculated. They would rid themselves of Haley, and they would do it in a way that no one would suspect. It would look like an accident, a tragic slip, a fall that could happen to anyone. Haley's death would be a means to an end, the final obstacle standing between them and the fortune they craved. With Haley out of the picture, Naomi would inherit everything, and Dani would be there to take her cut. It was the perfect plan that required cold precision and no room for error. The first step in their plan was to get close to Haley. Dani played the role of the concerned ex-wife, the one who was still grieving Bill's decline. She showered Haley with sympathy, pretending to be the friend she was not. Naomi, on the other hand, kept a more aloof and distant relationship with her father's wife. It wasn't hard to make Haley believe they were on her side. Bill's death was drawing near, and Haley was consumed with the fear of losing everything. She needed the support, and Dani and Naomi were happy to provide it. But as the days passed, Dani could see Haley's paranoia start to grow. She grew increasingly wary of the people around her, particularly Dani and Naomi. Haley was no fool, and she had started to sense that something was off. The women were too eager, too compliant, and she began to suspect that their concern was not out of kindness. It wasn't long before Haley became convinced that Dani and Naomi were plotting something. But by then, it was too late. They had already set their plan in motion, and Haley was walking into a trap she could not escape. The night of Haley's death was a quiet one. Bill had passed earlier that day, and the house was filled with mourning, but it was also filled with opportunity. While the other mourners were distracted, Dani and Naomi put their plan into action. They made sure Haley was alone, and then, in a moment of cruel precision, they pushed her down the stairs. The fall seemed accidental, a simple misstep. No one would suspect foul play. The women made sure of it. By the time the authorities arrived, Haley was dead, her body broken at the foot of the stairs, a victim of what seemed like a tragic accident. The aftermath of Haley's death was swift. The police began their investigation, but the circumstances seemed too perfect for them to uncover the truth. There were no signs of struggle, no evidence that pointed to foul play. Haley's death was ruled an accident, a terrible fall in the midst of the chaos following Bill's passing. The inheritance was transferred to Naomi as planned, and Dani was there by her side, claiming her piece of the spoils. But even as they reveled in their success, they could not shake the unease that lingered. Haley had been a force to reckon with, and now that she was gone, the shadow of her presence still loomed large. Dani and Naomi had won, but they had also become something they never anticipated. In their pursuit of revenge and fortune, they had become the very thing they had once despised. And as they watched their new lives unfold before them, they could not help but wonder, had they truly won? Or had they merely traded one form of captivity for another? The gates of power had opened for them, but they were locked in a cage of their own making. The haunting question remained, would they ever be free? Or had they sealed their own fate with the blood of their rival? The days following Haley's death were filled with a strange kind of quiet. On the surface, everything seemed to fall into place for Dani and Naomi. Bill's estate had been quickly transferred to Naomi, and Dani, as promised, had claimed her portion of the fortune. They had done it. They had removed Haley from the equation, securing the wealth and power they so desperately craved. But beneath the surface, something darker was stirring. The victory felt hollow, tainted by the fear that, despite their success, they had lost something far more valuable than money. They had lost their peace of mind. The police had quickly closed the case, ruling Haley's death an accident. The circumstances seemed to make sense. It had slipped and fallen down the stairs in the chaos surrounding Bill's passing. The grief, the shock, it was all too easy to believe. But there was a creeping doubt that began to gnaw at both Dani and Naomi. Something wasn't right. Neither of them had ever intended for things to go this far, but now, with Haley dead and the inheritance in their hands, they couldn't shake the feeling that their lives were about to spiral out of control. It wasn't long before the consequences of their actions began to unfold. The weight of guilt for Dani, the guilt was the first thing to set in. She had always told herself that she was justified, that her actions were simply a response to years of betrayal and abandonment. She had been wronged by Bill, and now she was taking back what she believed was rightfully hers. But as the days passed, the enormity of what she had done began to weigh on her. Haley had been more than just an obstacle. She had been a person, with a life, with loved ones. Dani knew she couldn't have known her, but the idea of taking a life, of becoming a killer to secure her future, it wasn't something she could easily reconcile with the person she thought she was. The guilt began to manifest in unexpected ways. Dani couldn't sleep. The faces of the people she had betrayed haunted her, especially Haley's. She found herself revisiting the night of Haley's death in her mind, replaying the moment when everything changed. Every time she closed her eyes, she could see Haley's lifeless body at the foot of the stairs, her neck twisted at an unnatural angle. She could feel the weight of that final push, the coldness of her own hands as she had helped Naomi finish what they had started. It was a feeling that would not let her go. Naomi, on the other hand, was more pragmatic. She was not burdened by the same sense of guilt that Dani felt. Naomi had always been driven by ambition and a desire for power. And to her, this was merely another step toward achieving her goal. Bill's death, Haley's death, it was all part of the plan. And now she was in control of everything. She had the wealth, the property, and the status she had always wanted. But even Naomi could not escape the growing tension that had settled over the house. She, too, began to feel the weight of what they had done. The quiet moments of reflection were interrupted by flashes of doubt, but Naomi quickly pushed them aside. She was stronger than that. She had to be. The investigation resurfaces. Though the police had officially closed the case, something about Haley's death continued to linger in the air. A small piece of the puzzle wasn't fitting. The authorities had been quick to rule it an accident, but there were some unanswered questions that wouldn't go away. An anonymous source, perhaps it started making inquiries, digging deeper into the circumstances surrounding Haley's death. A few people close to Haley had begun to speak out, voicing suspicions that something more sinister had occurred. And with each passing day, the whispers grew louder. The investigation was reopened, not out of any direct evidence of foul play, but because the circumstances surrounding the death were too coincidental to ignore. Haley had been on edge in the days leading up to her death. She had confided in a few people that she felt she was being watched, that she couldn't trust anyone in the house. She had become increasingly paranoid, and those who knew her well found it odd that she had fallen down the stairs so suddenly, just days after Bill's death. Dani and Naomi, while still trying to maintain control over the situation, began to feel the pressure mounting. The authorities had reopened the investigation, and with it came a sense of unease. They had gotten away with it once, but now the past was beginning to catch up with them. The detective assigned to the case, a seasoned investigator named Detective Clark, wasn't buying the story. He had seen too many cases like this, and something about the way Haley had died didn't sit right with him. The lack of a struggle, the lack of any sign of an accident, it all pointed to something darker. He wasn't sure yet, but he was going to find out. The unraveling as the investigation deepened, so did the tension between Dani and Naomi. The facade they had carefully constructed was beginning to crack. The cracks in their relationship began to widen as they realized that their lives were no longer theirs to control. Dani, plagued by guilt, began to pull away from Naomi. She no longer felt like the person who had coldly eliminated Haley to claim her fortune. The weight of her actions began to feel unbearable, and she found herself withdrawing more and more, questioning the very choices that had brought her to this point. Naomi, however, was not ready to let go of the power they had achieved. She continued to push forward, using every ounce of her cunning to protect their secret. But the pressure was taking its toll. She began to make mistakes, small ones at first. A slip of the tongue, an inconsistency in their story. They were both too close to the edge now. Dani's hesitations and Naomi's slip-ups were not going unnoticed. Detective Clark had started to focus his attention on them. He had observed their behavior, seen the subtle tension between the two women, and he was beginning to form a theory. One evening, as Dani was sitting alone in the garden, lost in her thoughts, Naomi approached her. There was a coldness in her eyes that Dani had never seen before. Naomi had always been calculating, but now there was something different. She was no longer the ally Dani had once known. The alliance had cracked under the pressure, and Naomi, sensing that Dani was no longer committed to their cause, had made a decision. "I didn't think it would end like this," Naomi said, her voice eerily calm. Dani looked up at her, a mixture of fear and regret in her eyes. "I never wanted any of this," Naomi smiled, but it wasn't a comforting smile. It was the smile of someone who had already made their next move. "You're weak, Dani, and now you're a liability." In that moment, Dani realized what was coming. Naomi had no intention of sharing the inheritance with her. The wealth and power were hers to keep, and Dani, having served her purpose, was now expendable. The bond they had formed was nothing more than a means to an end. As Naomi's figure disappeared into the shadows, Dani felt a chill run down her spine. She had come so close to having everything she wanted, only to realize that her victory was nothing but a fleeting illusion. Now, she was caught between the guilt of her actions and the very real threat that Naomi, the one person she thought she could trust, might be the next to turn on her. In the end, the gates they had crossed so confidently were not the gates to freedom. They were the gates to their undoing. And as the investigation into Haley's death closed in on them, Dani and Naomi were left to face the consequences of their greed, their betrayal, and the darkness they had unleashed. The price of their ambition would be far higher than either of them had anticipated, and it was only a matter of time before the truth came to light.